Welcome to the Rusted Garden Impromptu Live. This video will probably really get going in about 2 or 3 minutes. Just gonna wait for people to show up. And the theme is going to be on some tomato starting tips and prevention management for diseases and pests. I usually like to wait about 5 minutes and then I'll just get going with the video if you want to skip ahead when you rewatch this. Hello, everyone. We got 2 inches of snow. I'm just putting in the topic for today into the chat. We'll get started like in 2 minutes. Check out to see if there's any questions. So if you have a question while we go over the topics today are going to be real quick, a little bit on seed starting tomatoes and peppers. A lot of people have questions on timing, on getting them outside. And then I want to talk about disease management, insect pest prevention, those kind of things, and how to kind of put a plan together for this year, because that's kind of really important. I haven't checked out the Dune peas yet. So if you have a question while we're going through this, type in bold question so that I can see it, and I'll kind of try and integrate that into the conversation. So these impromptu pop-up lives are what I'm going to do pretty often, maybe once or twice a week. I'm enjoying them. They just fit better into my schedule. I don't have any scheduled live videos yet. So I think I'm going to do 2 in February. I'm having a hard time getting a set time that I can do it regularly. And I feel like for the live scheduled, I want it to be the same time, same place, all that kind of stuff. So I'm hoping that's going to be Sundays at 1 o'clock, but some things are changing at the place I volunteer at the farm, and we're trying to figure out some time. So I'll be doing these impromptus. All right, so, well, we'll go with Ruben H. And these are the questions that I get. Can I start my seeds indoors in zone 8? And that's a really big question. So I encourage people to go to my channel, because there's so many different kinds of seeds, and you start them at all different times, anywhere from 12 weeks to 10 weeks, 8, 6 weeks before they would go outside. And then you have your cool weather crops that can go out when there's a frost. And then you have your warm weather crops that would go out when frost chances have passed, the soil is warm. So to answer that question to Ruben, there are some seeds you can start now, but it really depends on when you want to get them outside. So, and that's the question everyone has. People are really excited. They want to get seed starting. I understand that. I highly recommend it. So trying to stay focused, let's talk about tomatoes and peppers. So today's January 29th, way too early for me to get my tomatoes out. These are cherry tomatoes. They sprout really quickly. And if you didn't just see the last video I did, you see the purple undersides of these leaves, purple stems. That's perfectly normal. If you're doing a slow and low fertilizing of your seed starts, tomatoes, healthy tomato plants will look just like this. Green on the top, some purple stem, some purple undersides, perfectly healthy. Now you can over-fertilize your plants, damage them, and they may start to look purple, but it's going to be more really deep purpling veins on the green leaves. Thank you, CC. Hopefully buy me a beer. I appreciate it. So if you see really dark veining in the green leaves, that could be a sign that you're over fertilizing with potassium, with phosphorus. Your seed starts need very little. But I want to stay focused. So for your tomato plants, these are 3 weeks old from when I put the seed in the soil, only about 2 weeks of growth. These are actually mature enough to go right out into your garden now if the temperatures are right. And that's what I just wanted to cover for people. People ask often, when do I start everything? Did I miss it? Am I too late? I see you have tomatoes. What am I going to do? These are props. So I don't really need to start these till March or April. So in saying that, these are 3 weeks old. Generally, people say you want to start your tomato plants indoors 6 to 8 weeks before they go outside. They want to go into nice warm ground, 60-degree soil temperature. How do you measure that? You can get a compost thermometer or a earth garden thermometer, and you're just taking the temperature of the top 4 inches of soil. However, you don't really need to do that. Watch your weather patterns. When the days are getting up into the 70s, the nights are in the 50s, you're getting rain, your soil is starting to warm up. So my last frost date is May 15th. The soil is also warming up mid-May. If I want to put transplants out just like this, 3 weeks old, that's okay. That's kind of another way to do it. You don't have to spend a lot of time growing these if you don't want to grow them 6 or 8 weeks. This is a nice little start. And when you put your tomato plants into warm soil, warm days, they just take off and they go crazy. So again, 3 weeks. But if you want a bigger transplant, 6 to 8 weeks from when you feel like your soil temperature outside is 50 degrees and frost has passed. Now for peppers, it's the same way. 50-degree soil, 60-degree soil, somewhere in that range. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be warming with no frost. And then the day temperatures are hitting into the 70s at times. Peppers, I tend to grow them for 8 weeks indoors. In fact, I just started a whole flat of hot peppers, different varieties. It's been 17 days. Not one has germinated, which I'm worried about. Usually within the 10 to 14 days, they start germinating. I just put them on a heat mat just to warm the soil up a little bit. It's been really cold. My grow room right here is below 65 degrees at times, so maybe the heat is a concern for the pepper seedlings. But I wanted to stress the point that you can miss the boat and only have 3 weeks before they might go outside into your garden, and you can grow transplants like this, and these are good, solid transplants. If you're on a schedule and you're doing pretty well, 6 to 8 weeks for tomatoes going backwards, 8 to 12 weeks for peppers. And that will be plenty of time to grow healthy seed starts and save yourself a lot of money. All right, let me check for some questions. Valerie Akers says, or asks, what do you recommend for seedling fertilizers? So I, first of all, create a sterile seed starting mix, and then I do add stuff to it. I don't always share you guys that because I don't want you to feel like you have to do exactly, what I'm doing. So a sterile starting mix is perfectly fine to use. I'm going to do a video on what I amend to it, and that's usually worm castings and some other things. But the water-soluble fertilizer I use is worm casting tea or diluted fish emulsion. And if I'm concerned about odors, because when you're using the organic fertilizers, sometimes you can have odors. You might have cats get attracted to that. You don't want to use it. If you have to, the chemical fertilizers are perfectly okay. You just want to use a small pinch of that chemical fertilizer in a gallon of water and mix it up. Usually it's a tablespoon. The whole key for fertilizing is not so much what you use, but a real slow and low feeding. And usually the question that follows that is, when do I feed my transplants or my seedlings? About 10 days after they germinate, once or twice a week. Instead of water, I do some diluted water-soluble fertilizer, and that tends to work well. And that's how the tomatoes, that's how this whole flat is being grown. And they're doing really well. These are mostly flowers, except for the tomatoes in there that I'm doing for plants. So we'll get to disease prevention, insect management. The whole keyword is management. You're not going to be able to prevent problems in your garden, but I just want you to realize they're not your fault. And the whole goal is to manage them down. Check for questions real quick. Fred H says, are you too early in your tomato and peppers? Yeah, I'm a little bit early, but I use them for video props, and you can hold peppers inside for a pretty long time. Tomatoes, in my opinion, once they get to be 8 weeks old, they want to flower and fruit. So growing them inside past that really isn't the best thing, in my opinion. All right, buzzing through here real quick. Urban Chicken Mama is planning her first plant sale. I actually, one of these pop-ups I'm going to do is on selling plants, kind of doing your first plant sale. I wish you good luck, Urban Chicken Mama. I think you'll do really well. It's a lot of fun. You can actually grow plants. This is what I have water and I don't want to spill it. This is about a 10-inch cup, poke holes in it. If you grow all kinds of different vegetables in here, tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, squash, zucchini, all that, sell them for $2 a plant and as a yard sale out your driveway or something, or at flea markets, you can make a lot of money, supplement the costs for growing a garden. It's a lot of fun, and I'll be doing a whole live video on that. All right, Wendy Ortega. I'm starting my seeds next week. I bought a light that's 500 or 5,000 lumens. How long do you leave the light on? A good rule of thumb is leave it on 14 to 16 hours, leave them off 10 to 8 hours. 5,000 lumens is pretty good. Couple inches over your seed starts and see how it goes from there. Ruben H asks, what are the best fertilizers for tomatoes? So I would just recommend going to my channel. I use fertilizers that are on sale. Best thing for your garden is compost, composted manures, composted leaves, combination of all that kind of stuff. And any organic granular fertilizer is pretty much the same stuff. That works really well. I even use alfalfa pellets in the garden. So Cronin Scott asks, have you tried grafting tomatoes, peppers, or eggplant? I haven't, but I always wanted to. And one year I even bought the little super small grafting clips and just never got to it. Maybe I will try some of that this year. I think it'd be pretty cool to graft 4 different kinds of cherry tomato varieties onto one rootstock and then just have that growing, and you have different kinds of cherry tomatoes in one space. I've not wintered sowed tomatoes before, Ann MC asks. All right, so that's just the general presentation I'm going to give for tomatoes and peppers. Is make sure the soil is warm. Getting them out early, even covering them up, really doesn't add much to growth. It's targeting the right nighttime temperatures, soil temperatures, and day temperatures for tomatoes and peppers. So let's talk about prevention and, switch gears question-wise to diseases, insects, pests. What comes to your garden? How do you guys manage it? Please talk in the chat. I like this format because when I can't answer a question goes up there. You guys help each other out, which I think is wonderful. So it's never too early to think about prevention, stopping pests, stopping diseases. General rule of thumb, when you first started a garden, maybe you had a blank slate, you started growing stuff, pests and disease showed up. You didn't do anything wrong. They weren't necessarily in the soil. They weren't necessarily, in that general area. Where they are is just about everywhere. Insects will fly in, spores float through the air, spores for, like powdery mildew overwinter on host plants, not just in your garden debris. So in saying that, I don't want you to feel like if you get a disease in a container plant, you have to throw the container soil away. It's just a waste of money. If you're growing, in the ground and your tomatoes get a disease, you don't have to move the tomatoes to another area. That disease is going to show up. And the reason being, just think about it, is if you just start for the first time, there's no pests, there's no diseases, they show up. It's not your fault. Why do I say that? Because you're going to read online very often that if you're watering right, if you're fertilizing right, if you're using compost, you're going to have healthy, strong plants. And people say, my plants don't get any diseases or pests. And that may be true. I would say they're just growing in an area where the pests and disease that I get in my garden and you get in your garden just aren't there. So don't listen to that. But you do have to have a prevention plan, and you do have to have a management plan. Let me check for some questions, and then we'll get into that. The Rios family homestead says, I get these orange-red ants on my tomato plants every year in the summer, zone B, South Georgia, and stink bugs. What do I do, please? And thanks. So let's start with that. Stink bugs, squash bugs, they look similar. They're around most places. They are hard to manage. I found that my neem oil spray doesn't really work. Peppermint oil spray might help a little bit, but I actually go out and I look for them. I water my squash plants and my zucchini plants by hand right at the base. When all that water comes in, the squash bugs climb up the stem. I look for them. I kill them off. I do use insect dust. You can use something like Sevin, which is a chemical, or Captain Jack's dead bug dust, which is organic. And I actually remove the flowers and leaves up the stem from where it starts in the earth and really clear out a good, 6-10 inches. And I dust that. So those insects will crawl through the dust, and that helps keep them at bay. In regard to the ants, if the ants aren't causing any damage, then there's no need to do anything about it. Just because you see insects and stuff, you don't have to kill them off. Now, if they are causing a problem, you want to try and figure out if they're ants that eat proteins or they're ants that eat sugars. And you can do a borax sugar bait. I have that recipe on my channel. I'm not going to give out recipes now because I guarantee I will screw up the ratios and then somebody's going to try it out and damage their plants. So I don't know exactly what to do in Georgia for those ants, but now is the time to start researching it and figuring it out. And then let's use that example. So think back, if you haven't taken notes, to when those ants showed up, or when diseases show up, or when insects show up. And you want to start your management plan a good 2 weeks before they show up. So you're spraying for powdery mildew 2 weeks before it shows up. You're putting down whatever you want for the ants 2 weeks before they typically show up. And that is a good way to start managing down the problem, is by keeping a journal. Whatever you want to use your phone, put the information in there. You won't remember it year to year unless you write it down, but just write down when every insect shows up or pest and when every disease shows up. And then your prevention plan is going to be rolling back 2 weeks, 3 weeks before they show up in your garden. And then that's when you implement your plan. Let me just check for some questions. Don't burn poison ivy because the oils will float in the air and you can breathe it in and it will infect your lungs. Large squirrel problem from Papa Meatball. So you have to trap and release squirrels. You can, if you want, I guess you could shoot them, but you can't really prevent them from getting into your garden. If they're harming your garden, trap and release, drive them 3-5 miles away, release them. Usually do it in the spring when they're going to have a whole spring and summer to adjust, but there's not much you can do except trap and release, in my opinion. And Ruben H asks, how often should I water my pepper? Ruben, I'm going to ask you to watch all 1,500 of my videos. You have very good questions, but that can't be answered because you may have to water 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week, and then the next week only 1 time. So have fun with it. Write down what you're doing, take notes, and just use this year as kind of a test run and adjust as you need to. So Sunshine Country Chicken says, colloidal silver on my seedlings have had amazing results. I've not tried that. I've heard good things about it. If you want to share a link or let people know what that is, that would be great. Any thoughts on controlling grasshoppers? If they're coming in, I would probably look for an insect dust that's going to kill them off. Any insect dust that you use, organic, chemical, doesn't matter. It kills good and bad insects. So you have to use either, with respect and try and do it in a way that's going to limit the damage. One false belief people think is that if it's a organic fertilizer, it's safe, that it can't harm you, won't harm other insects, but it does. It's just a different form. Organic pesticides are much safer, but you still don't want to get them in your eyes. You still don't want to, ingest or breathe in stuff. So just be careful with that. Jason Roberts, any advice for grubs? So when you're digging in your garden, you're going to see grubs in there. A lot of times, depending where you are, at least in my area, the Japanese beetle grubs. Grubs aren't necessarily a problem, and you can't really treat them. I mean, you could try putting like a neem oil drench in there. It's, let me just think a second. I think that I'm just testing it out. I'm just testing it out. And I think I used 4 tablespoons of neem oil in 1 gallon of water and 2 or 3 tablespoons of the Castile type soap. Mixed it up, shook it well, and then I just drenched in the area of one of my garden beds that had a different problem. And it did help with those wire worms. But getting to grubs is going to be tough. You can look into soil drenches like a neem oil soil drench. I don't really recommend putting dust and stuff in there. I mean, there is some good things in your soil for bugs, that are going to do good things and, maybe be predator insects and stuff like that. Anyway, every grub isn't necessarily a problem. If you have grubs that are just chowing down the roots of your plants and you have a problem, that's when I would worry. But if you're just digging and your garden has been fine and you see grubs, just let them go. All right. So here's this, back to the prevention plan. I like this, pop-up to go about 30 to 45 minutes. So back to the prevention plan. So we're thinking, 2-3 weeks of when that problem shows up. And I will talk to you a little bit about the oils and the different sprays that I make, but I ask you to look on my channel for the recipes, again, because I don't want to mess it up, just saying something wrong. So before we get to that, if you use a spray that I say is safe, if you find one online, if you buy a product, always test spray. And that means spraying some tomato plant leaves, wait 48 hours, see if there's any damage. If you're going to use that spray on pepper plants, then you have to spray the pepper plant leaves, wait 48 hours. If you're going to switch over to zucchini plants, again, you get the idea, spray a couple zucchini leaves, wait for damage. You want to make sure the sprays that you're putting onto your leaves don't cause any damage. And once you figure out that they're safe, spray the rest of your plants. But don't spray like kale leaves, which are thick and strong, and they can take heavier sprays, and then think you can go and spray maybe your tomato plants, and there's not going to be any damage. Tomato leaves are a little more wimpy and softer, and they may get damaged. Also, if you're spraying in the spring, early summer, when the temperatures are 70 and 80 degrees, the leaves are nice and plump, basically. They're, full of water. They're rigid. They can take sprays. When the heat comes midsummer, later summer, the leaves sometimes kind of soften because they're trying to deal with the heat. And if you hit that leaf with a spray that did no damage in 70 or 80 degrees, and you're hitting it well now that it's 90 degrees or 100 degrees, that same spray can damage your plants. And if anything about today's live video, I want to save you headache from damaging your plants and hopefully, to stop some pests and disease. So that's the thing with sprays. Just check for questions real quick. So here's a large fire ant. So again, there's 2 kinds of ants that eat sugar, ants that eat protein. The borax bait works really well for sugar ants. I'm experimenting with orange oil. Orange oil has a chemical in it that damages the ant when it contacts them. So I'm working on that. Orange oil might be an organic way to deal with them. All right, so let's start with some diseases that I get in my garden. So I use neem oil. Oh, and one more thing too, is if I sell all this at my seed shop, neem oil, peppermint oil, rosemary oil. I will have orange oil there eventually. If you don't buy it from me, that's perfectly fine. And I appreciate everybody who has supported my seed shop. Just make sure you're buying oil, the complete oil extract. Nothing that is diluted in any way. You want 100% kind of pressed leaf oil for your mints, rosemary, and your neem oil. And neem oil has to be 100% cold pressed neem oil, because that's what has the chemical components in there. One of them is called azadirachtin, and that's what the insects eat, the caterpillars eat that are on your cabbage, your broccoli, your cauliflower. They eat the neem oil, and it has the azadirachtin in it. It kills off that insect. When you're buying neem oil at stores, read the label, and it's usually in the left corner. It'll say hydrophobic extract of neem. Hydrophobic extract of neem. That's garbage. They take out all the good stuff. They leave some neem oil behind. It doesn't do much. I wouldn't buy it. If you want to use it to control chewing insects, 100% cold pressed neem oil. That's really important, because I don't want you to be using a product out there that you think is working and it's not. And then therefore your garden suffers damage. Clove oil is really good. I'm experimenting with that. All right. So if you're growing kale, collards, cabbages, broccoli, all the plants in that family, if you see that white butterfly that flies around, I used to call it a moth. I was corrected. It's a butterfly. It flies, psychotically all over the place. They show up in my area as soon as it starts to get warm. I see them from April all the way to September. They lay eggs on your brassica plants, collards, kales. They hatch. You get those green worms. They eat holes in your leaves. The best way to deal with that is using a neem oil spray. And the key is spraying 2 weeks before they show up, about once every 7 to 10 days, undersides, top sides. That controls them. There's also a product called BT, and I don't want to butcher it, but it's like Bacillus thuringiensis or something like that, but it's called BT, and it's organic, and it works similar to neem oil, is that you spray it on top side, underside. The insect chews a hole in your leaf, ingests it, and it dies off. You can also put dust down. You can put Captain Jack's dead bug dust on your leaves, and the worms will crawl through that and it will kill them off. Sometimes with dusts, if it's raining, you're going to have to apply it again, because you can't really put dust on the undersides. So the idea is 2 weeks before that moth would show up, or that butterfly that would show up, you're putting down neem oil, BT, or dust. Not all three. That's the other concern I have, is that people start buying all kinds of different products, and then they just start hitting the plant with more products than they need. You're not giving it enough time for it to work. And then, and it's only natural. We think, well, if we're spraying the kale right now, let's go spray the tomato plants. Well, the tomato plants don't need it, because that butterfly typically doesn't bother that tomato plant. So you have to have a plan in place. I hope that makes sense. Every 7 days of spraying, Macmillan family says that's what they do. That's fine. And again, like I might say 10 to 14 days. Some people might say 2 to 3 weeks. Whatever it is, whatever you pick, 7 days or 14 days, 10 days, 21 days, just stick to a routine. That's what's most important. That's what I want to impress upon you all today. Keep a journal, take notes, try every 7 days. If that's working, don't change it. Try every 14 days. If that mostly works, but it doesn't, maybe you go to 10 days. You kind of have to figure out that prevention plan, by testing it out. Aphids on kale. I really have found peppermint oil works to kind of prevent them from showing up. But if they show up, I really just do a soapy water spray. They're very fragile, soft-bodied insects. I use the Castile type soap, which is really clean and pure, not a lot of impurities in there. Actually, there aren't any. It's like the cleanest soap you can get. What's the difference? That's more of a soap. A lot of people use like dish detergent, which is okay, but it has stronger chemicals in there. So where I would use a tablespoon of the Castile type soap, I might only use a teaspoon of the dish detergent. So you also have to keep that in mind too, is when you're making soapy water sprays, what kind of soap or detergent are you using? Shelly G, do you feel 7 dust is bad to put on your flowers with no blooms? No, I don't actually. And I'm like 95% organic, and I wouldn't put the dust on flowers or budding flowers. And I don't cover the whole plant with the dust because I don't think it's the best way to really use it. What I do with dust, if it's 7 dust, which I don't mind using if I need to, or the Captain Jacks, I put it at the stem, I remove flowers, and I put it on the outer leaves of my squash and cucumber plants, trying to keep it away from the pollinators and stuff like that. But I guess my point is I don't want to preach to you all. If all you have available is a dust 7 or a Captain Jacks, and you're getting your crops wiped out and you're not having a good experience, maybe you have to use the dust that way and just do your best with it. Jean Mario's question. I had a hornworm problem last year. Wasps killed them for me. Do you think eggs will be present in the soil? I don't know the life cycle of the hornworm. We get them here. I rarely see them. Even if you do, there's not a whole lot that you can do, but you can kind of have a plan in place for when they show up and, take care of them before they do a lot of damage. And it's probably a good point to say here that that's the whole thing, is that you're managing down pests, managing down insects, managing down diseases. So it'd be great if I could say how you can prevent it 100%, but we want to manage the damage down so that we still get great production. Trooper 4985 says microwaving seed starting mix. When I used to do that, I would put it into these big bags, and it was just easier to do it that way. You can use a bowl if you want. That was his question. If you're going to microwave seed starting mix, just be careful you don't leave it on too long and start a fire. I mean, it sounds funny. I know you guys would be cautious, but sometimes people don't recognize it. It stays on too long. They walk out of the room, it can burn. And how long do you microwave it? So it varies. So if I was gonna microwave a starting mix, I do recommend the boiling water. It's safer. I would make sure it's damp, and I would probably just do 30 seconds and then another 30 seconds, check on it, and just kind of watch it till it heats up to a good temperature. But I would just do it in 30-second bursts. All right. Here's one more question. Christina, how often do you plant tomatoes or peppers or the transplants to have a permanent production for sale? Well, that's a good question. So it depends on how many you would sell, and it depends if you're just doing it in your driveway. I will be doing a whole pop-up video on this. Or maybe you're doing flea markets, you're going to church flea markets or something like that. So it depends on how many you want to grow. And I don't know what that would be for you, but I can tell you years ago, I would have 800 to 1,000 plants ready for the first plant sale. And very often I sold out. And each year, as people got to know that I was doing it, more people would show up. And it was a pretty cool way to bring in money. And I was selling at that time for $1 a plant. All right, so Nicole Marie says, does neem oil keep pill bugs off the cabbages? And I would say no, it doesn't. I haven't seen any evidence of that. So neem oil is great for chewing insects. It's great as an oil. Most oils, if they contact soft body insects, they smother those insects. But neem oil has the azadirachtin for chewing insects. That's what I primarily use it for. So that's one thing. I got the green cabbage worm that comes in, or any kind of chewing worms. Neem oil, BT will work really well. So then let's go over to bean plants. So you have the Mexican bean beetle. And for years, I had trouble with that. And because I like picking the green beans and eating them, I didn't want to keep spraying them over and over again with neem oil and stuff like that. And I found the neem oil didn't seem to work on the Mexican bean beetle. Neem oil, wash your produce. It's considered organic. I wouldn't recommend ingesting it, but I haven't seen evidence of that being a problem. So, but that being said, I wanted to figure out a way to deal with the Mexican bean beetle. And I found that peppermint oil rosemary oil, combination of both, sprayed on the undersides of the leaves once a week, maybe twice a week, 2 weeks before that bean beetle shows up, kept them away. It also kept spider mites away, which I thought was really cool. Now, neem oil, once you mix it, I think it's only good for about a week because sunlight can start breaking it down and the chemicals break down. Peppermint oil and rosemary oil will last as long as you want to keep it in there. So I make a separate tank of peppermint oil, rosemary oil. Sometimes I combine them. Just depends on what I feel like doing. And, on a nice day, I'll be spraying the undersides of my beans once or twice a week. It works really well. All right. So Urban Chicken Mama says, I left your sea chap neem oil out all winter. Did I hurt it? I don't know. I don't think freezing causes a problem for it. Neem oil will thicken up. If you buy the cold press stuff, like sometimes you'll get it from us, it'll be that nice dark brown. It's liquidy. Sits somewhere, it cools, it gets thick. You just put it into warm water, it will melt again, and that's how you mix it into your spray. But I think, I just typically say neem oil is good for about 2 years because I've used it 2 summers from the same bottle, no problems. I don't really know third year how that does. Earthy Artist said, well, what do you think of baking seed starting mix? That works too. As long as you get it to a temperature that would kill out any fungus gnat eggs, you're perfectly fine. I'm glad you caught the live, Lynette. And again, I will be doing scheduled live, but that's not going to be till February. All right. So rosemary oil, I like the peppermint oil because it smells a little bit better. If you go to my seed shop, you'll see there's a little bit of difference in what they manage, but generally speaking, you could just pick one or the other. If you don't want to buy both, you don't have to. I do like combining them. So the next problem that I had in my garden were cucumber, or with my cucumber plants, and it's aphids. Aphids are tiny, with spider mites. They're just tiny, really small insects that seem to be resistant to sprays and dusts. They start on the bottom of leaves and they work their way up. They're just present everywhere. You can't clean your soil. You can't clean your debris. They're going to show up. Think about if you were a super tiny spider mite, and like when you open up peppermint oil and you breathe it in, it can kind of burn your eyes, or the menthol is really strong. Well, that menthol spray on a spider mite irritates them, kills them, deters them. And I've had great success now over the last couple of years by spraying peppermint oil on the undersides of my cucumber plants. Again, 1 or 2 times a week, and it works. The recipe, generally speaking, is you'll see that they come in small bottles. It's just, 1 or 2 teaspoons in a gallon of water. So you don't need a lot. And a little bottle goes a long, long way. I highly recommend buying the oils from me or from somebody else rather than going and buying the sprays in the stores that are basically clove oil, cinnamon oil, peppermint oil, rosemary oil. If you read the back of it, it's like 0.3%, 0.6% of the oils. The rest is inert or doesn't count. But they can $14 for a spray. A little bottle will make dozens of gallons. Cheverez Wilson says, how do you feel about buying predatory insects? So when I moved to my 2-acre homestead, I have flowers all over the place for predators. I did buy ladybugs and release them in an area that I put in all kinds of stuff for them to live, and they've actually hung around. And I have more ladybugs than I need, which is good. They even come inside during the winter and during the summer and stuff like that. So I think it's a good idea. If you can purchase, the predatory insects, and you can put them in a place that they're going to kind of flourish and stay, I would do it. If not, they're just going to fly away and you wasted your money. You want to have a place for them to live and hang out. Chris Brandman says, I have dwarf tomato plants. saw some spider webs on there. Those are probably spider mites. And I would, make a peppermint oil spray and soak the plant. Test, again, like I was saying, test that spray that you make first on some leaves, see how it does. Doesn't do any damage. After 48 hours, go ahead and use it. All right, so we're at 40 minutes. So maybe these impromptus and pop-ups can go an hour or two, because once I get talking, I kind of really enjoy it. Is there a difference, Vanessa Ray, between neem oil and neem seed oil? So I don't know. So neem oil is a nut. They take the nut, they crunch it down, get the oil out, maybe. But what you want to purchase is 100% cold press neem oil. That's what you're looking for as the ingredient. Gail Greenberg, hi there. I'm here from France. One of the things I love about gardening is meeting people around the globe. It is a universal hobby, and we should be proud of ourselves that I think we're wonderful people doing wonderful things with the earth, and we can share it across the globe. Jason Roberts, thoughts on companion planting to help monitor and deter pests. So there's a lot of information out there about companion planting, and I haven't found something that works great. For instance, marigolds do help protecting your plants by masking scents and smells. However, that was really written from the original French marigolds that were really strong smelling. And over time, we've bred that smell out of the marigold for a better flower. So it depends on what you're putting in there. What I do think is a good idea is putting in flowers to attract beneficial insects, predator insects, and to also trap other insects that may go to your plants. So that's the next thing that I like to use rosemary oil for and peppermint oil for. I will go through at 2 teaspoons per gallon, certainly test spray. That's just good practice. But I found it doesn't damage much. And I will spray my squash and my zucchini. I will spray a lot of my plants just with that when I'm walking around. It smells wonderful, but it does help mask the scent, helps deter some insects from finding your plants, but ultimately they're going to find them. And how does that work? So some insects, usually pollinators, look for bright colors and flowers and stuff. That's why you have bright flowers and all that. The insects that tend to feed off of or damage your plants often go by smell. So when a leaf is broken, the plant puts out pheromones, that insect smells it, and they just fly in, and that's how they know you have squash and zucchini. All right, so that being said, if you start a brand new garden, you have no pests, you have no disease, they show up. So now it's coming towards fall. What do? I don't recommend panicking. I don't recommend throwing away your container mix and replacing it. I think it's a waste of money. I don't recommend moving your tomato plants to the other side unless you want to, because in a standard small garden, even one my size on my property, the insects figure it out. They go over there. Crop rotation and all that is great if you have tons of acreage and you're moving, one type of plant that takes this kind of fertilizer out of the soil or gets this sort of, root disease, and you move it to the other side of the farm. That makes perfect sense. But in a smaller garden, in a container garden, you're not going to get much benefit out of that. You're going to get the benefit out of having a prevention and management plan with the idea of managing down diseases like we've been talking about. All right. So the next thing, and then we'll wrap up, is that there's lots of beetles, cucumber beetles, different beetles that run around. I use dust on them. I use Captain Jack's dead bug dust. That's organic. And the way that I do that is whatever it is, if it's squash, zucchini, pumpkins, melons, any crawling beetle. Actually, there's one more after this. I put it on the outer leaves away from the flowers and, just kind of do a couple leaves around the plant. At night, those cucumber beetles are really active. They will crawl through it and usually die very quickly. And when you go out and inspect the leaves, you're going to see the striped or spotted cucumber beetle laying there. You don't have to take the dust and dust every leaf, every flower, every part of your cucumber plant. That's overkill. You're going to harm more good things and really get the bad things. Just concentrate it on the outer leaves, and the beetles will naturally just walk across that. And again, you might do that every 7 days, every 10 days, every 14 days. But if you stick to a routine and you start, 2 weeks before they typically show up, you're going to really manage down the damage and the problems. The other thing I want to talk about are flea beetles. I have found that no sprays really work well on flea beetles. I use 7 Dust on them. I find it kills them right away. And the way that I do it is I put, in the evening, I put the 7 Dust on the leaves. Flea beetles hop around and pop around all over the place. I put a bag over them so that good stuff doesn't get in there. And I do that for a night. It often kills off most of the flea beetles. I'll do it again, maybe 2 or 3 times that week. In the morning, I rinse off the dust, and that really kills back the flea beetles. Now, Diatomaceous Earth is just silica from microscopic ocean organisms. That works too on insects, but it will also damage good insects. So that's also a dust, and I would put that on the outer leaves. When the insect walks through there, it doesn't poison them, but that silica gets into their joints and on their soft body, and it just kind of grinds that shell down. They dehydrate, kills them off. So there's a lot of ways to do it. I'm not saying, pick the oils that I sell, pick the oils that I use the dust that I use. I just want you to understand the prevention planning, the management plan. Thank you so much, Lynette. I appreciate it. She says, I've done 2 garden tours at my little humble home. Thanks to you, shouted you out at the first one 2 years ago. I learned a lot. I appreciate it. I can't say how much I love interacting with all of you. I do keep track, because I answer these comments all the time on my YouTube channel, up the videos. I do kind of keep track in my head of what you all been doing, and it's kind of cool to see everybody growing. And also, in saying that, I also learn a lot from all of you. All right, so we got the flea beetles. The next thing, and we're going to wrap up here, for prevention planning, for and for getting production out of your garden, your diseases, your pests are going to come same time, same place every year, and then they're going to stop coming same time, same place every year. So I like planting cucumbers in May, in June, July, August. Problems come in, problems go away. I put in healthy plants, remove the bad plants or the sick plants, and I continue getting cucumbers the whole season. Don't struggle trying to keep one plant alive. When you have backups growing, do your best to help that plant survive and produce, and then you just replace it. That's a good way to do it. And I did forget one thing, powdery mildew. So powdery mildew, different funguses, different molds will come when humidity is right, moisture is right in the air. There's all kinds of different kinds. You can get on cucumbers, squash, zucchini, melons. I use baking soda spray for that. Baking soda spray changes the pH of the leaf, so the mold or the fungus, usually it's a mildew or a fungus, can't really do its thing on there. So sprays for like powdery mildew, you're really changing the pH level on the leaf. Powdery mildew can't really take hold and grow, so it doesn't spread. Again, whatever you choose to use, it's really doing that prevention 2 weeks ahead of time. You don't really want to be spraying when the powdery mildew shows up. You do if it does show up, but you want to try to start to spray before it shows up, and that keeps it well managed. All right, so I think we covered a lot on prevention. I hope you think about starting a management plan, take notes for the entire year, and then you'll be able to adjust it year after year. And Brian Saber, any thoughts on increasing microbiology, soil diversity? So my question would be, what would you add to increase the diversity? Because if you're doing a good job with compost and organic matter, it's going to be really diverse, and it is a great way to keep problems down rather than you have some sort of imbalance. Now, you can think about purchasing beneficial nematodes if that's what you're talking about. You can put them into the soil. My thought would be is if you don't have a problem that needs beneficial nematodes, yes, you've increased the soil diversity, but they're not really doing anything. So you sort of have to know what your problem is. So I would agree you want to maximize your soil diversity by really having super healthy soil with lots of organic matter and compost. And you want to keep that going, and soil life will do its thing. If you get a problem, then you think about, well, what can I add microbiological wise, if that's a word, to fix the problem. So let's end on this. So I also use H2O2, hydrogen peroxide. It's a game changer. I use it on my tomato plants. I would send you to my videos on that. I've really broken down the formula, but hydrogen peroxide spray on the leaves stops early blight from getting to my tomato plants. And it basically, you spray it on, the hydrogen peroxide reacts with the sun, it does its disinfecting thing, it goes away, cleans your leaf. Do not spray 3% hydrogen peroxide right from the bottle onto your plant. You will damage them. You have to get the ratio down, and I have plenty of videos on that. But that again means every 10 to 14 days, I might spray my tomato plants with that. I start a good 14 days before that early blight shows up, and I'm really able to manage that problem down, and my tomatoes grow well into September every year. All right, thanks so much for watching. There will be more pop-up live videos coming. That's a lot easier for me to do now, and then I will be trying to get out scheduled live, typically Sundays at 1 o'clock, starting in February. Thanks for watching.